Hello and welcome to the final starting line of the 2013-2014 Biennium. I'm Sarah Allen. Starting line featured its first bill on January 28, 2013. Since then, we have gone on to highlight 25 more bills, taking turns featuring legislation by Republicans and DFLers. The series has covered a wide array of topics, from raising the minimum wage to funding for inner-city passenger rail projects and allowing the use of firearms without a permit.
One of the bills has been passed into law as a standalone bill. A couple had their bill language included in bills that were enacted into law, and others are working their way through the legislative process in hopes of becoming law.
For this final starting line of the biennium, we look back at the bills we have covered and sit down with two success stories of our series.
Like last year, many of our starting line bills this year never made it out of the original committee they were referred to. Take, for instance, House File 3196, a wolf trapping and baiting ban, House File 3318, a bill that would provide a right to carry a firearm without a permit, and House File 2344, a bill that would prevent any additional public subsidies besides the state's funding share of the stadium to host the Super Bowl. All three remain in the committee they were first referred to. Bills that were re-referred to a second committee included House File 3254, a bill that would study the impact of North Dakota's oil production on Minnesota, House File 1931, a bill covering e-cigarette restrictions, was heard in three different House committees. Under the bill sponsored by Representative Lori Halverson, a DFLer, the state would regulate e-cigarettes the same way it regulates tobacco. House File 1921, a bill that would require televisions in public to display open captioning if capable of doing so, was recalled from one House committee and referred to another. Sometimes a bill heard in committee will be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. That's what happened to Representative Sarah Anderson's bill, House File 2404, which would allow Sunday sales of growlers. The Republicans' bill was added to an omnibus liquor bill passed by the House, but tabled in the Senate. House Commerce and Consumer Protection Finance and Policy Committee Chair Joe Atkins, a DFLer, amended his version of the omnibus liquor bill onto a gambling bill during a May 8th House floor debate, but omitted the Sunday growler sales. Representative Halverson's e-cigarette bill and House File 2581, sponsored by Republican Representative Jerry Hertas, which would allow licensed dentists to administer flu vaccinations, is currently in the Omnibus Health and Human Services Policy Bill. It's not uncommon for the same idea to be brought up in different bills. Take, for example, minimum wage. Starting line featured DFLer Representative Joe Mullery's bill that would raise minimum wage. While Representative Mullery's bill was not heard in the House, another minimum wage bill sponsored by Representative Ryan Winkler was passed into law this year.
On August 1st, 2016, and I'll just use the large employers as an example, on August 1st, 2016, the minimum wage will be $9.50.
We also featured House File 31 on Starting Line, a bill that would increase state reimbursement for reduced-price school lunch meals. It was sponsored by Representative Jerry Newton. Although his bill did not make it into law, Representative Yvonne Seltzer's bill, House File 2480, that would guarantee a hot school lunch to any student who wanted one but could not afford it, was passed into law. Republican Representative Bob Barrett's bill, which would regulate farmers markets in the state, is our first standalone starting line bill to make it into law. DFLer Representative Diane Loeffler's standalone bill on updating and repealing advisory groups could also follow Representative Barrett's bill and become law.
Representative Loeffler and Representative Barrett, thank you so much for joining us here and talking to us on our last starting line of the biennium. We wanted to have both of you on since you are success stories of the series. Representative Loeffler, your bill, which repeals and updates advisory groups, has been approved by the House and is in conference committee. And Representative Barrett, your bill, which regulates farmers markets, has been enacted into law by Governor Dayton. And Representative Barrett, let's start with you. How does it feel to have your bill passed and enacted into law?
It's a good feeling. It means that a wide group of people support what you're trying to accomplish. Both legislators who voted for the bill, I think it was a pretty close to unanimous in the House and the Senate as well. But in this particular situation, it affects people all over the state, you know, in regards to making farmers markets easier to manage, allowing them to sample, and just allowing for them to do the things they need to do to perform and create a good farmers market for their community. And we also added the chili cook-off provision in it. And I did not know that there are so many chili cook-offs around Minnesota. And to know that I could help accomplish something to make their jobs a little bit easier and their weekend fun a little funner, or more fun I should say, is really a good feeling.
And what about you, Representative Loeffler? What does it mean to you to have your bill potentially on its way to becoming a law?
Well, it's really exciting to be the person who carries the final product across the finish line. But this one, you really feel like you've been part of a team, because this started way last summer and fall with a lot of meetings with all the people who represent and work with the 162 advisory committees to state government. And so those advisory committees, the staff to them, gave input to the Legislative Commission on Planning and Fiscal Policy. All the different policy committees throughout the legislature had input. And now we're going to work out about 10 differences between the House and Senate bills and bring it back to the floor. And it was really well received, I must say, by people throughout the legislature. It's not the most exciting bill, but I think it says how much we value citizen input in Minnesota.
Representative Loeffler, how many bills have you had passed by the House, and how many of those were enacted into law?
I've had a whole lot of different topics, from environmental issues. I work a lot on health and human services and environmental issues and taxes, particularly property taxes. And sometimes the most meaningful ones are the ones that come from our constituents. And I've got one of those this year that was in an omnibus bill, the Omnibus Education Policy Bill, in which a teacher who had a very joyful thing happen in her life, she had a baby, was really dismayed to find out while she was on maternity leave that because she went on maternity leave, she would not have the 3 years of continuous progress on probation and be able to enjoy tenure. Instead, the clock would start back to zero and she'd have to wait another 3 years for that career milestone. And I think when we changed those statutes, we just didn't think about normal things that interrupt someone's career, like a car accident, having a baby, other things. We heard from people who lost their ability to have tenure and had the clock start over, missing it by 5 days. And so it's really fun when an idea comes from the public. You can talk to others, find out others are impacted, and bring it across the line.
And Representative Barrett, this is probably not your first time having a bill passed into law. What other bill have you had that's made it this far?
Well, I had another bill this year actually that just got passed into law yesterday. It honored a gentleman from our community who was a Navy SEAL in Afghanistan, died in combat. And a constituent, as Representative Loeffler said, the best bills are those that come from the people we serve. And this one came from a constituent who said, you know, we need to honor this man, Nicholas Patrick Spihar. And so I said, sure, I'd be happy to support that. We got it through both the House and the Senate. Governor Dayton has or will sign it very soon. So we're going to honor this young man who gave his life to our country with the naming of part of our road in Chisago County after him. And I just feel humbled to be a part of that, especially the fact that it came from a constituent who said, you know, we got to do this for this young man. And I agreed with him totally. So that was probably the bill that I cherish the most because of what it meant to him and all the other people who serve our country.
Speaking of Governor Dayton, who is a DFLer, and also the DFL controls the legislature, what does it mean for you, being a Republican, to have two bills being enacted into law this session?
Well, I hope that people know me as a sincere guy who feels strongly about certain things, and know that when I talk or when I present a bill, I've thought about it and have done it for a particular reason. And so I have many friends along party, or not along party lines, but outside of the party structure. And a lot of people, I think, in the public don't realize how much communication and cooperation and partnership go in between the parties. It really isn't anything that we talk about greatly, but I've had 5 bills signed into law, and I counted up, and I think it's around 650 votes for the bills and about 6 against. So nobody would know that there's overwhelming support for many bills that happen in the legislature. Just certain topics rise to the level of maybe being on TV or being in a newspaper. But a lot of things happen here across party lines.
The majority of the bills that we pass with bipartisan support, but they're not seen as newsworthy as the conflicts. And as a result, I think the public sometimes get a skewed perspective on how much the tension is between the parties, because most of the time it's people who are elected who want to do good work for their communities and for the state, and who want to make sure that we have strong schools, that we have strong communities, that we have safe communities, and there's a lot of common ground. But for the media and the news reporters, sometimes the conflict is more interesting than the commonality.
You know, the farmers market bill, I worked with Minneapolis, City of Minneapolis. I worked with the Department of Health, Department of Agriculture, Farmers Market Association, and Farmers Union, all with divergent maybe thoughts and ideas about what government should be and maybe what farmers markets should look like. And we all came to an agreement. It took a while, as your bill. It took a while. You talk to people and you understand what's important to them, and you try to work with them to find common ground. And that happens often here. And I'm happy that we could report on it today.
Yeah. I think the other thing that people don't always understand about our process is that most bills get rolled into what we call omnibus bills. And they're introduced as separate ideas, separate bills with separate authors. They go through the committee process, get their own hearing with witnesses and testimony, and then they often get rolled up into a large bill that has all the bills dealing with a broad topic, whether it's education policy, health and human services policy, tax policy. And that's so that we have everything in one place and we can make sure that they don't conflict and that they work well together. It also makes our work more efficient. But I think sometimes people think, oh, well, I looked up your bills and I didn't see a lot of them had passed. And they did pass into law. They're in the omnibus education bill or the omnibus tax bill, and they are in law. They just get combined together into packages.
And the last question for both of you, do you think your bills will resonate with your constituents? And when you go back home to your district, will you be promoting these bills that are now on its way to passing and has already been enacted into law?
Well, it gives me an opportunity to tell them about how we are once in a while doing spring cleaning, as I refer to it, in terms of updating and reviewing what we're doing. Sometimes people stereotype government as never doing that, and we do. But more importantly, it gives me a chance to talk to them about how we need their ideas and engagement. We need them to bring their expertise, to volunteer, to step up to these advisory councils. We need their insights as professionals in the field. And there's a way for people to look at the Secretary of State's website. Every month they announce the opportunities for people to step forward and serve the state. And it's a wonderful way for them to add their professional experiences, their life experiences into the policies that we make.
And Representative Barrett, are you going to be going back to your district and talking about your bill that you had signed into law?
Well, I'm going to be sharing in the bill that I signed into law regarding farmers markets. We have a farmers market Friday evening in Chisago City, starting at 4 p.m., and we invite everyone coming through Highway 8 in Chisago County to that. So I'm going to be there because I love farmers markets and I love to sample some of the items they have there. And so I'm going to actually participate in some of the improvements to our local farmers market, maybe even go down to Minneapolis on a Saturday morning and check out their farmers market. Always wanted to do it, never been down there, but But I think I'll try to do that and just see how things have improved.
And I would be delighted to invite you to come to one of the 3 farmers markets that takes place in my district.
Wonderful.
We have one large one that Minneapolis is known for, but most of our communities throughout Minneapolis have their own farmers markets, and they're real gathering places, and I'd be delighted to visit yours sometime.
Would love it. See, there we go.
Again, we appreciate you both making time for us this morning to talk to us about your bills.
You're
Great.
quite welcome.
Thank you.
Here's a brief look at the bills we tracked this biennium on Starting Line and where we saw them end up in the legislative process. All 26 had their introduction and first reading, and all 26 bills also were referred to a House committee.
Here's a look at the bills re-referred to a committee, including House File 1931, the e-cigarettes regulations one, which was re-referred twice, and House File 1921, a bill that would require televisions in public to display open captioning if capable of doing so, was successfully recalled from one committee and referred to another.
These 2 bills had their bill language offered as an amendment in a House committee, House File 31 on reduced price school lunch reimbursement, and House File 957, a ban on school construction near landfills. Both amendments failed in the House committee that they were offered up in. These 3 bills had their bill language offered as an amendment on the House floor. Those 3 amendments also failed.
And here's a look at some bills that had their language included in an omnibus bill, including House File 1405, a bill that would appropriate problem gambling money. Language was included in House File 1233, the Omnibus Health and Human Services Finance Bill from last year. House File 793 had its bill language included in a bonding bill that did not pass the House last year. And here's a look at a couple of bills that had their bill language passed out of the House.
House File 1863, a bill which would repeal or update advisory groups, is in conference committee. House File 3254, a bill which would study the North Dakota oil production on Minnesota. Its language is in Senate Tax Bill, Senate File 2726, which is also in conference committee.
You can learn more about our Starting Line bills and other bills through our online news service, Session Daily. This nonpartisan news source employs a staff of professional writers, editors, and photographers that provide you with in-depth coverage of the Minnesota House of Representatives during session and when news warrants. To see the past bills featured on Starting Line, go to www.youtube.com/MN House Info and click on the Starting Line playlist.
Thanks for being part of our show and tracking bills through the legislative process with us. As always, remember, thousands of bills get introduced every legislative session in Minnesota. All of them first have to cross the starting line.